Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey catch-up and chit-chat on my week. And I think it's been a particularly hard week for a lot of us, most of us, but we're going to dive in initially with the books at least, and enjoy those. So first off, I finished up Lost Places by Sarah Pinsker, a short story collection, and I really enjoyed it, though not quite as much as Sooner or Later Everything Falls into the Sea. I'd been buddy reading both of these collections with my friend Shannon, and we really have loved Sarah Pinsker's style of writing, mainly kind of near future science fiction, very atmospheric, very open-ended and thought-provoking stories, definitely. I would not say there was a clear through line to this collection as much as the first, but it definitely had more atmosphere and vibes and ominous elements to the stories, where it felt the first collection was more technology and the insidiousness of technology in our lives. And so I don't know that I connected as much with the stories in this one. Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather is in this collection. That's probably Pinsker's most popular story, and it's interestingly set on a forum that's talking about this song and kind of uncovering details about the song. It's very kind of spooky. And that one has been nominated for loads of awards. So I would say this has the most popular story that Pinsker has published, but yet it didn't cohere together into something bigger. I think there were a lot of moments here, though, that were great. So anyway, I enjoyed it a lot and do intend to read more of Sarah Pinsker's work almost imminently because we're continuing on to a novel. So then I read The Bell in the Fog by Lev AC Rosen. This is the second in the Evander Mills mystery series. This is set, this is a kind of a period piece in the 1950s, and we're following Evander Mills, aka Andy, who is a gay policeman at the start of the first book and gets disgraced because they discover he's gay, and obviously it's not socially acceptable in that time. And he goes on to connect more with the gay community and then start his own detective agency, or he becomes a private detective out of one of the local gay bars. And so this entry, we are seeing him continue that along. He's been at it for, it seems, a couple months now, and he's approached by someone from his past, a fellow former soldier, a Navyman, who is being blackmailed over being gay and having photos of himself with another man. And Evander knows him from a relationship they had in the military. So there is that, him seeking out this blackmailer and trying to find out what's going on there and prevent it. There's also kind of a separate missing persons case as well. But I would say the core of this story is digging into that military element and the ways that gay people were treated in the military, the way they had to be silent and closeted about their sexuality, the ways that it was weaponized against them if it was found out, and just the real hardships of existing during that time in the military, which even now is horrible still and continuing to get worse. So I think that was really a great core to the story with this mystery thread running through it, and I thought that was fantastic. Where this one didn't quite work as well for me as the first one. At the beginning, it was very slow to start, and because he's a detective, he's going around kind of seeing people and seeking out new information, and every time he's meeting someone, it felt very repetitive, where he's kind of introducing himself, and then they go, "Oh, you're the gay detective," and like, it was very repetitive of him explaining his story every time. And I felt like we could have jumped over that or something. It could have been a little bit more condensed down, so we weren't just repeating the introductions over and over. And that was my main nitpick and gripe. Otherwise, the character I continue to like very much. I really liked the mystery plot sort of accomplishing this hard-boiled sense without falling into a lot of the tropes, and also achieving the sense of place and time really, really well. That's the strength of this series for sure. So I enjoyed this second entry a lot. Then, oh man, okay. Well, I read a nonfiction book, Off the Deep End, Jerry and Becky Falwell and the Collapse of an Evangelical Dynasty by Giancarlo, Granda, and Mark Ebner. This was clearly like ghostwritten by Mark Ebner and with interviews by Giancarlo Granda. So I was turning to this as a distraction from politics, as sort of a salacious tell-all. And it is that. It's very easy to read, very simply written, but it's not a distraction from politics. It's very, very, very connected to politics. But I kind of have to back up because this is about Jerry and Becky Falwell, who were the leaders of Liberty University. And I grew up evangelical, and Liberty University was probably the biggest, mainly evangelical Christian university. And they, as a homeschooler, they very much were a place that was available because they would accept sort of lower standards of entry and sold that as a positive, more or less, because homeschoolers were getting the shaft, more or less, from standard academic institutions. And it's all of that sort of victimization of, well, they're attacking our Christian values kind of deal. In reality, they notoriously have really, really terrible academic standards and nearly accept anyone who applies. They also have this extremely rigid moral code that they fine people for any infraction. So they're letting in anybody who will give them money, and they're fining everybody for extremely rigid behavior standards. So it's all about the money. So that is something that really I was connected with personally. That's not in the book very much. It's like alluded to, but not significantly. And in the course of this, you are hearing about Jerry and Becky as the leaders of that and their behind the scenes workings, but much, much less than you are getting Giancarlo Granda being sort of groomed into a relationship with the two of them, primarily with Becky. He starts out as, he's referred to as the pool boy, but he's really like a cabana boy at a very upscale hotel who sort of caters to everyone that's there and assures they're getting waited on, getting bottle service, that kind of thing. And she's there, she meets him and brings him into their life. And it gets very much into the sexual relationship details of the two of them being involved and Jerry also being there present and watching. And having this whole dynamic. It was a weird sell at the beginning because he almost entirely presents it early on as something that seems like a consensual relationship. And I think that was really effective because he later does kind of come around and show the more insidious sides of that. But it's a really long time to be reading about that, what seems like this is an adult consensual relationship. And there's not really anything extreme to it. And then we get into him becoming more and more part of their business life because he's trying to get a business degree. He's someone who's had a lot of interest in business and has been pursuing real estate deals and ideas. And that is when Donald Trump comes into the picture because he is just lining up his initial first-term presidential campaign run, and Jerry Falwell, as a leader in the evangelical world, throws his power behind Trump. And what is so interesting to me through all of this, or I guess I'll back up and say that at that point, that's where things start really to become unhinged because they start experiencing increasing threats because they're pursuing power more widely. They start getting questioned outside of their evangelical circle. And then Michael Cohen gets involved, who was Donald Trump's fixer, who has since been convicted of crimes and gone to jail, all of that. He becomes very involved and more insidious things start happening to Giancarlo under some threat. It seems, he very strongly implies, from Michael Cohen. And apparently Michael Cohen has also written about this in his own book. So that's very questionable. But what struck me about that whole element is that it is abundantly clear, had they stayed within their evangelical circle, they would have really continued getting away with all of the other stuff that they were doing behind the scenes. Because really, beyond the sex scandal that this is mainly focused on, it was a massive pile of monetary grift, self-enrichment, nepotism, and just predation and use of power to harm people. And that just over and over and over. And it's clear, had they stayed in the evangelical circle, they would never have been questioned. That was an open secret. Everyone there knew about it, basically, it seems. Even students on campus were aware and just sort of nodded off things that were happening that were unethical, or it was just sort of, well, that's just how they are kind of deal. And so they could have kept going, but their seeking of power outside of their bubble and trying to expand to the rest of the world is what got critical eyes on them finally. They would have never been questioned within the evangelical community. Yeah, so anyway, so that's the whole middle of the book. And then this winds down, unfortunately, with the fallout. But I feel like this didn't deliver on its promise because the reality is they didn't really face anything. They were forced to resign, but with millions of dollars in gold parachutes to take with them. And only when they tried to return to involvement in the university did they begin facing some pushback and a growth out of the Me Too movement of further sexual assault claims against them and against the school over them burying sexual assaults on campus, repeatedly losing evidence, not reporting to the police, things like that. Just rampant. Women who face sexual assault being silenced and then facing code violations and fines for the victimization of themselves. So this was really hard reading. I think that reading between the lines, he has a very strong bias in what he's talking about, but it's really apparent even with that bias that things that were wrong very, very clearly happened here. This is not, even though it's one-sided, it's objectively very bad what went on. And I think it just goes to show the level of corruption and manipulation and control that religious groups can have and are being exposed for more and more and more in these massive cases. I mean, this was a school that I very much was looking to go to at points and thankfully ended up not going to. But there were many of them out there that have gone through quite similar exposures, and it's just rampant. Anyway, so I feel they didn't really face justice. I feel this didn't deliver on the promise, and it was not at all a good escape at all from politics. But I did voraciously read through. It was very consumable. I also think that there maybe is a tone of machismo to this. He fixates on some strange things, like he spends an inordinate amount of time on how he keeps being called the pool boy, and he really hates that. Like, it's an affront to him, to his pride. And it's like, you were groomed and faced all of this other horrible stuff, and you are spending a huge amount of this book annoyed by being called a pool boy. Like, and that being the slander that's in the media is that he was called a pool boy. I feel he's misdirecting his pain into that, but it just seemed very, very strange how extremely fixated he was on that. So anyway, I thought this was fine. There's nothing special about the writing or voice, but it is very readable and extremely, extremely frustrating to read. Then, finally, for books that I read, I have Catch-22, another really difficult read, unfortunately, and I'm going to read some bits from it for you. But this is effectively, it's kind of like MASH in that it's somewhat of a mundane and slightly humorous take on World War II, and we're with a bunch of soldiers and we're following around with them, as the kind of central conceit is the Catch-22, that there is this more convoluted and more specific idea of what that Catch-22 is, but it's basically them being trapped in something that is irrational. And reading this, you definitely get the sense of the frustration and the arbitrariness over and over and over through this, because especially they're flyers and they are supposed to fly a certain number of missions and then they're done. But the person over them keeps raising the number of missions and they're very upset about that, and they keep feeling like it's so arbitrary, but this guy wants to raise his status. However, across all of this, they all suck. Like, every person, to a man, they're all awful. They are so small and petty and caught up in their own perspective. They're totally unable to see anything from someone else's side. They refuse to take personal responsibility while always thinking they know the right way and only their interpretation of what's going on is correct. And it is so infuriating to read, but yet it's kind of an important book. And it gets across its point very effectively. I don't know that the satire and humor worked for me. I think it's probably very of its time. But I think the book was effective, and I got it, why that was how it was. So I think that in the end, that more convoluted description of what Catch-22 is boiled down, and they're talking to a woman who is victimized, and she says, Catch-22 says they have the right to do anything we can't stop them from doing. And that's what it really boils down to. They're saying all of this really specific stuff about what Catch-22 is, and it's this complicated thing they're entrapped in. But really, what it is the arbitrary rule of power over people who are powerless. And that feels... I wish I would have talked about this last week, or I wish I would have finished the last little bit that I had last week to talk about it. And it has become increasingly hard to talk about this week, especially because the next section that I'm going to read you is a demonstration of that principle. As we're winding down the book, we see they're looking for this lost girl, or a couple of the soldiers are looking for this lost girl to figure out what's going on with her and help her out, potentially, because she knew one of their friends. And what happens is really, really terrible. So I'm going to read this all, but I'm going to put a timestamp if you want to skip it, because it does contain some potential violence. Yossarian was aghast. But you killed her, Arfi. You killed her. Oh, I had to do that after I raped her, Arfi replied in his most condescending manner. I couldn't very well let her go around saying bad things about us, could I? But why did you have to touch her at all, you dumb bastard? Yossarian shouted. Why couldn't you get yourself a girl off the street if you wanted one? The city is full of prostitutes. Oh no, not me, Arfi bragged. I never paid for it in my life. Arfi, are you insane? Yossarian was almost speechless. You killed a girl. They're going to put you in jail. Oh no, Arfi answered with a forced smile. Not me. They aren't going to put good old Arfi in jail. Not for killing her. But you threw her out the window. She's lying there dead in the street. She has no right to be there, Arfi answered. It's after curfew. Stupid, don't you realize what you've done? Yossarian wanted to grab Arfi by his well-fed, caterpillar-soft shoulders and shake some sense into him. You've murdered a human being. They are going to put you in jail. They might even hang you. Oh, I hardly think they'll do that, Arfi replied with a jovial chuckle, although his symptoms of nervousness increased. He spilled tobacco crumbs unconsciously as his short fingers fumbled with the bowl of his pipe. No, siree, not good old Arfi, he chortled again. She was only a servant girl. I hardly think they're going to make too much of a fuss over one poor Italian servant girl when so many thousands of lives are being lost every day. Do you? Listen, Yossarian cried, almost in joy. He pricked his ears up and watched the blood drain from Arfi's face as sirens mourned far away, police sirens, and then ascend almost instantaneously to a howling, strident, onrushing cacophony of overwhelming sound that seemed to crash into the room around them from every side. Arfi, they're coming for you, he said in a flood of compassion, shouting to be heard above the noise. They're coming to arrest you, Arfi. Don't you understand? You can't take the life of another human being and get away with it, even if she is just a poor servant girl. Don't you see? Can't you understand? Oh no, Arfi insisted with a lame laugh and a weak smile. They're not coming to arrest me. Not good old Arfi. All at once, he looked sick. He sank down in a chair, in a trembling stupor, his stumpy, lax hands quaking in his lap. Cars skidded to a stop outside. Spotlights hit the windows immediately. Car doors slammed and police whistles screeched. Voices rose harshly. Arfi was green. He kept shaking his head mechanically with a queer, numb smile, repeating in a weak, hollow monotone, but they were not coming for him. Not for good old Arfi. No siree. Striving to convince himself that this was so, even as heavy footsteps raced up the stairs and pounded across the landing, even as fists beat on the door 4 times with a deafening, inexorable force. Then, as the door to the apartment flew open and 2 large, tough, brawny MPs with icy eyes and firm, sinewy, unsmiling jaws entered quickly, strode across the room, and arrested Yossarian. They arrested Yossarian for being in Rome without a pass. They apologized to Arfi for intruding and led Yossarian away between them, gripping him under each arm with fingers as hard as steel manacles. So that feels unbelievably timely and generally horrifying. And so I respected this book for what it is. It's a very long book. And I intend to watch the movie to see how they have adapted it in a better time, or when I have more mental fortitude for that. But this was very interesting, and I respect it, as I said, but I didn't really enjoy it because this feels like the most overt and huge. I mean, this is a really significantly long book. It's almost 500 pages of continual toxic masculinity, and this is a satire of that, and just the horrors that that level of mentality inflict. Not just on others, but on themselves. They do harm to themselves, their friends, and everyone around them over the way they act. And it's just awful to be with every one of the people in this book, but it rings true increasingly. So this was a terrible book that I'm glad to have read, I think. Anyway, it was an interesting reading week. Yeah, it was tough reading. And this one was a weird one, actually. So I should point out, I started reading this around April last year, and for some reason, there are continual waits and holds on the audiobook because I was listening to the audio as well, because it is very well dramatized by an individual who fits the tone and is similarly styled to the author's sense of humor and style. So that was the best way to read it, I think, pairing the audio with this, but I kept having to wait, and I was not significantly prioritizing this. So I would lose the audiobook and then come back to it. I didn't even know if I was gonna finish it, but I did. And I am glad to have finished it because particularly those sections which I read were toward the end. And as things come together, it only became increasingly impactful to read. Anyway, the books I finished this week, or not, those are the books I finished this week. The stuff I'm reading currently has not changed from previous. I don't think I've added anything new, so I'm not even gonna bother talking about those. House of Leaves, I kind of hit a major milestone in finishing the actual book proper and being into the exhibits, which are still a significant chunk, if that means anything to you. So still plodding along with House of Leaves. The stuff that I watched this week, I watched a lot of stuff, and mainly I've been turning to stand-up comedy. The week was already quite difficult before this weekend, and it only got significantly mentally and emotionally more difficult. But turning to stand-up meant I watched Bob the Drag Queen's This Is Wild, which was very funny and also insightful and topical, as well as Kumail Nanjiani's Night Thoughts. I found out Kumail was going to be on Taskmaster in the next season, which I'm very excited for. And so I noticed he had this stand-up special that I had not seen yet on Hulu, and I watched that. Also very funny, very insightful. Wow, it was really, really good. He has a big section about his cat, which I love, and a big section about going to therapy and his experience with therapy that I thought was really fantastic, and he wound it down perfectly for the moment of having empathy with one another. And I just love that. So those were a couple of stand-up sets that I watched. And then I have also been just utterly binging Josh Johnson's stand-up on YouTube. Josh Johnson is an anchor on The Daily Show, but he also is a stand-up comedian and is incredibly prolific at it. He seems to be constantly out doing stand-up sets and writing new ones week to week because his style is sort of topical storytelling. And so literally once or twice a week, he has a new half-hour or hour-long stand-up set that's on the topic that is meaningful, insightful, and also funny. And so especially the past two that he's had out have been really hard-hitting and important. But I just binged a whole bunch of them. So I think I watched like 6 or 8 of his stand-ups, and they were all fantastic. You pretty much can't go wrong. I also watched some other random stuff. The new season of Queer Eye came out, and final season, which is heartbreaking. It feels very sad and timely. They were in Washington, D.C. for appropriate reasons, and it feels like that was the right moment and also heartbreaking, but I think it was really hopeful and beautiful, as always. So I love the new and last season of Queer Eye. I also watched a movie, Love is Strange, which stars Alfred Molina and John Lithgow as an older gay couple who are just getting married after it's been legalized, after being together for years and years and years. And this follows them just getting married and then one of them losing his job at a Catholic school because they got married. Even though it was kind of an open secret, everyone there knew that he was gay. Him getting married is a bridge too far and they can't have him be openly gay there. And so they fire him, and the two of them then lose their home. They end up relying on living with their friends, and the conflict of them having to live separately because they don't have a place to go. And they're in New York City, so it's a real struggle for housing, basically. And that was, again, very heartbreaking to watch, really a very emotional movie. And it's all about very slow, plodding, emotional performances. And seeing them struggle with taking up space in others' space, trying to minimize themselves and being away from each other for the first time and not feeling like they belong suddenly or that there's a place for them was very, very hard to watch. But it was a really beautiful movie. I think that's everything that I watched this week. As far as life, I think the main thing, generally, broadly, that we'll mention quickly is the snow. I am certainly in the path of this massive snowpocalypse that's going on. It is incredibly, incredibly cold. I think it's supposed to get down to -5, -6 tonight, Fahrenheit, which is horrible, with a massive wind chill, a really significant wind chill. We also got snow starting quite a bit earlier yesterday than it was supposed to, but it has continued snowing. So we have now over a foot of snow outside. So I'm just very much snowed in and keeping warm at home and trying to be safe and everything. Just got spammed with closure notices. The whole city has just completely shut down. But in the midst of that and being closed in at home, the news came out yesterday of a political conflict. And so I am going to go into talking about that. I will be wrapping up here with the political stuff. So I completely recognize that not everyone can ingest that right now, because people are really struggling with a lot of mental and emotional weight at the moment. And so do what you need to. I completely understand that a lot of people are here for just the books. So we yet again saw a federal agent shoot and murder someone who was out protesting in Minneapolis. And it's horrifying because, and I'm not going to go into personal thoughts on details of what happened. I'm angry that now I'm not someone who seeks out looking at videos of this stuff, but I've now had to watch video of people being killed twice in a matter of a couple weeks because I feel the need and the weight on myself to bear witness and not look away from what's happening right now, especially because regardless of who I voted for, these things are being done in my name as an American by the leaders who were elected to represent me. And so at very least, bearing witness is a thing I can do. In the case of the Renee Good shooting, there were a lot of things up in the air and argued about technicalities and whatnot. Here, that's not even part of the narrative. It's just simply the statement that everything would be fine if this person had not exercised their First and Second Amendment rights. But if you can't exercise your rights in times when things are tense, then you don't have those rights. From all the way at the top down to the internet trolls who are arguing, well, if he just had complied, obeyed, not been protesting, if he just stayed home and hoped this was happening to his neighbors and not himself, everything would be fine. The argument to not use your fundamental rights means we don't have them and is fundamentally un-American and anti-freedom to say. I maintain that I have a hopeful outlook despite the horrors of everything. I've said this many times before, but I feel that what we're seeing, what we continue to see, is a grasp for power in a mindset that is falling away. They've bet everything on taking dominant authoritarian power because it's a political ideology that is a dinosaur facing extinction, and they don't have any other way. This didn't gain power out of wild popularity. Not just here in the US, but elsewhere in the world. We're seeing this grow in the administrative levels, but people don't like it. And the main reason it was able to get there was apathy. They grasped it out of the apathy of the people. And what we're seeing now is a turn away from apathy. We're seeing a lot of people become engaged, look like myself, confront what our nation is doing, and learn about how our nation does work and how it should work. We're supposed to be a country that has equal justice, and we never really have been. We're supposed to be a country that agrees no one is above the law, and we really haven't. But those are the ideals and values we are supposed to strive for. So I'm just heartbroken in this moment in seeing any argument that people should be denied their rights, in seeing arguments that clear lies are acceptable, in any argument that people should get a pass and not be held to account by the law for their actions just because of a position they hold in power. And I think things are turning. I do. But I don't think it's going to be easy or immediate. And I think that's only going to continue to be hard. So I will continue to be here. I hope that we won't have anything this extreme for at least a little while. But take care of yourselves is about all I can say. Be kind to yourself and to the people around you. Support your community where you can. And do your best to be good and engage with your rights and support the rights of yourself and others. So I think that is what I have to say about what has gone on. I think that I do have a couple of recommendations for videos that are politically topical, so I'm going to keep them here with the politics section. I specifically mentioned the Josh Johnson comedy sets, and the last 2 weeks have been particularly strong, but the set that he did, titled, I think, Ice versus Good, was incredibly insightful and meaningful, and I think everyone should watch it, because he really digs into the ideas of morality versus legality, and just getting away with things that we've all now collectively agreed are immoral, and also the idea of progress as something that pushes against and finds the bending points of legality and creates a new standard. And I think that's where we are. We're going to create a new standard, and demand a new standard. The other thing is a little more hopeful, and that is Dr. Joanne Freeman here on YouTube, is a historian. I sort of discovered her, I had a confluence of things in that she was working with Library of America, the publisher. They published the Ursula Le Guin bind-up of the Hainish novels. They're really wonderful. But she was working with them in a history capacity because she specializes in American history and specifically the Revolution a few months ago. And then shortly after that, I saw her connected with Heather Cox Richardson, also a historian who's wonderful here on BookTube, on YouTube. But Joanne Freeman has started doing, just popping on late at night to chat at us in these sort of thoughts for people who can't sleep videos. And they're really wonderful. They really help to give perspective, I think. And they're fairly quick rambles of about 10 to 15 minutes. And she's just popping on to give some perspective on what she's seeing that is, from the perception of a historian in the arc of history, something hopeful or optimistic in the moment that she can find. And that really has just been helping me and grounding me immensely. And so I heartily recommend you not only check out those videos from the past, I think she started a week and a half ago maybe, and just kind of did it off the cuff, and now it has turned into a whole regular thing because of the way things have been going. So subscribe to her so you can continue to catch those, I would say, because they have really, really helped. So I will leave you with those videos and say, I'm just heartbroken right now and struggling, wildly varying between stable and just an emotional wreck. This moment feels like the collective trauma to America that we felt at 9/11. Like, I cannot liken it to anything else. So if you're outside of the US and experiencing this, know this, we are aware, we're seeing and understanding the weight of this, but there is only so much we can do. So I, with that, leave you and say thank you for being you and for being here.